It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #EventIcons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Use the question panel on the webinar to submit your questions. Or you can hop on Twitter. Submit your questions with #EventIcons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #EventIcons.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of #EventIcons. My name is Alex Plaxton. I am founder of Little Bird Told Media, and I am one of your co-hosts today, along with our friend Tahira. Tahira, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Tahira. I am one of the co-hosts of EventIcons. I am an event producer and wrote a little book about intentional event design, and very excited to be on today's episode with one of my, iconic events joining us today.
I think everyone would say that South by Southwest is iconic, so we're very excited for today's episode. As you know, South by Southwest put Austin on the map as a destination of choice for arts, music, film, and generally being cool. What's great about South by Southwest is it covers interactive music and film. And in this episode, we are talking to the master of South by Southwest Interactive, our friend Hugh Forrest, who serves as the director of South by Southwest Interactive Festival, which is the 5-day gathering of digital creatives that occurs in Austin every March. So thank you, Hugh, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. I am certainly no event icon, but we can pretend otherwise for the next hour or so.
Let's do that, because you know what? If you just have to just own it just for a little while. So it really is an iconic event. Something that I think everyone who has ever been in the industry thinks. We sort of have our list of our top 5 that we want to go to. So now you've been working with South by Southwest for quite a while, actually. So what got you into that? How did you get your first start into this place?
Well, I joined South by Southwest back when it was a very, very small organization in 1989. I was the first paid employee for South by Southwest, which is kind of neat. The even neater story or funnier story always gets a laugh. I got hired at South by Southwest because I had a computer and they didn't. So it was an early lesson in the importance of having the right hardware at the right time. All the more funny or whatnot is that it was a Mac Plus. And, if you think of where we are with our smartphone now or whatever, that Mac Plus is about 1/1000th of what our smartphones are now. But
my dial-up Tandy.
Yes, it didn't even have that, at that point. It didn't even have a internet connection.
Didn't need it. The internet didn't exist yet.
It didn't exist for most of us. I think it existed for some people. But I was when I got out of college, I was bound and determined to become a writer. I still want to be a writer when I grow up. And I was doing a newspaper in Austin, alternative monthly newspaper, and I had bought or had convinced my dad to help me buy a Mac Plus and a laser writer, which would reduce the typesetting bill significantly. So again, that Mac Plus was my ticket into the event world. And again, the fact that I had a Mac Plus in 1989 when not everyone had a Mac Plus eventually is where I got kind of tapped to help manage this thing called South by Southwest Multimedia when we launched that in 1994. So that is all the more funny because I am certainly the least technical person that I know. And so me running a tech event is kind of a ongoing joke.
So it's important to be a first adopter for technology, but you don't have to know anything about technology. See, anybody can do it.
All right. Well, good then. I get a little bit of an absolution on that.
Absolutely. So I think you already answered our next question, which is, what would you be doing if you weren't in the events industry? And that would be being a writer, or is there another thing to add to that list?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to, at some point, try to pursue being a writer. I think I've, at this point, my writing is kind of digressed to 140 characters or 280 characters, as with most people's writing. And my brain is even less wired to write than it was at one point. But maybe that can be changed. I certainly enjoy the South by Southwest work a lot. There are times I don't enjoy it, like all jobs, but it's proven to be very satisfying in a lot of ways, and it's been incredible to be part of this the growth that we have been lucky enough to experience. So that's pretty neat.
It truly is an incredible thing. So,
well, having been at the event or worked at the event for many years when we couldn't figure out how to grow it, and then when it does suddenly start to grow, there's certainly a even more satisfaction at that. And I'm sure that even beyond the event world, lots of entrepreneurs feel that way when they have something that they think is the right thing and it doesn't work and it doesn't work and it doesn't work. And then finally it does work, and wow, this is great.
So what do you think, this is not on our list, but I'm going to ask you anyhow. So what was the tipping point of where you kind of went from, how can we get it to grow, to, wow, it's really growing?
I think that the most obvious tipping point, if you're just looking at a timeline, was 2007, which was when Twitter ostensibly launched at South by Southwest. I say ostensibly because they'd actually launched 5 months earlier, but they used South by Southwest kind of as their coming out party. The success within the relatively small group of people that were at South by Southwest certainly encouraged a lot more startups to get involved with South by Southwest, which in turn encouraged more VCs to get involved with South by Southwest, which just created this cycle of growth that really fueled us for the next several years. But even pulling back a little more from that, we first started doing a lot of content on social media in around 2004. And, in terms of where we are in 2018, social media is obvious. It's a part of most of our lives, for better or for worse. 15 years ago, it wasn't very obvious. It was this is an interesting thing. One of our keynote speakers, I believe in 2004, was a guy named Jonathan Abrams. Remember him? That's a yes or no.
Yes.
he was the CEO or founder of Friendster, which was the precursor of MySpace, Facebook, all that stuff, and that was kind of our first, little bit of push into social media, and social media again proved to be one of the things, most important things in terms of fueling our growth.
Okay.
So it sounds like integration has been a really big part of what has made South by Southwest grow. It's key for technology. It seems to be key for South by Southwest. I'm curious, for those of you in the audience who don't know, Hugh, if you could tell us a bit about what your specific role is right now and how that fits in with the organization.
Well, I usually answer that question like this. My role is to answer a lot of emails. But I realize that's what we all do in life, or most of us do in life, so probably that's not specific enough. At this point in the journey of South by Southwest, my most specific role is to try to kind of come up with a overarching idea on what we're going to cover, what our themes are going to be, what it's going to be most important for our content being panels and presentations, keynotes, featured speakers, that type thing. But in reality, again, it is 10 months of very, very minute details, as most people who are working in the event business know. I mean, you've got thousands and thousands of details. Hopefully you can manage a large portion of those, and certainly the more of those you can manage, the more successful the event is likely to be. But you also need luck, and you also need to be covering something that people want to learn about, right?
You really do. So again, I'm just going to do a little divergent here because, I thought to me is one of the most interesting things, because you certainly are, South by Southwest is certainly known for its content. It's one of the things that I think you've done phenomenally well. You have launched a number of products. You have seen, like you said, those startups that have, become the unicorns, who have really used South by Southwest as a launching pad, which is amazing. So, that takes a team of people to figure out who are those people and how do you find them? So we are really curious about the people behind the machine. So, obviously you're absolutely key to that. So, but how big is your team, your core team? And then as you start to kind of roll it out, what does that look like?
At this point, we have a full-time year-round staff at South by Southwest, about 170 people. That number will swell to maybe 250 as we get closer to the event. And then, as with a lot of events, we're using literally thousands of volunteers who are essentially running the event on site. In terms of my role as heading up the content, we've got about 50 people in my team. I'm not as good a manager and not as good a delegator as I'd like to be at some point. So I'm still learning how to manage that large number of people and to delegate and to oversee that. But certainly the success or the success of the event of South by Southwest is very much because we have much smarter people who understand technology on my staff, who understand details, who take care of a lot of those details, who are much more experts in the specific areas that they work on. And by that, I mean that at this point, we have, or for our 2018 event, which was in March, we had 24 different tracks of programming. So each track has what we call a track lead, which is one person from staff who kind of manages, babysits that track, oversees that track. A person who's a track lead maybe oversees multiple tracks, so they're track leads for multiple tracks. But again, they're the ones that are experts in those specific areas and are in charge with trying to find the most compelling content for those areas.
So it's big. And I imagine that takes a lot of organization. I know you mentioned, having people on your team who are very tech savvy and everything like that, but are there any specific key technologies that you and your team rely on in your planning?
Well, yes, it is. We've been lucky enough to scale to a pretty large event at this point. We're certainly nowhere near as large as something like CES, but we are larger than most. And I think that the fact that the event has become fairly large is why I'm on your show at this point. Although I think that there's also a strong case to be made that people get as much value in smaller events where they can connect to more people. All that said, to your question about technology, we are very, most of our data systems are geared in FileMaker. As we talked a little bit about when preparing for the show, we use a program that's called attendees to move around a lot of our content, whether that be move around, manage a lot of our content, whether that be panel programming, whether that be film screenings, whether that be band performances. We're using a program called ShiftBase to help slot our volunteers, to help our slot our staff. But ultimately, all this technology pales in comparison to just, in my mind, pales in comparison to just many hours put in by lots of very, very dedicated people, and essentially working 10 and a half, 11 months of year on producing one event in March. And our success is very much tied to that effort. The technology helps a whole lot, but the human effort is still the real the secret for our success.
I think that's something people don't really understand about events, is that no matter how much technology you have, ultimately what it comes down to is the humans who are willing to put in the time. Because it's, one of the statistics that I saw about South by Southwest when we were talking about chatbots was that you had something like 56,000 questions answered by chatbots from an FAQ perspective versus a human having to answer them. And I thought that's, that's amazing and smart. And I know I want a chatbot desperately. So my next year's goal is that we will have a chatbot doing that. But it's also, on the human side, you have sort of, obviously you have stakeholders, and then you have the people who are developing that content, and the creativity that goes into it and the thought that goes into it, that you have somebody leading each stream and really digging deep into, what is going to be that turning point, when thousands of people come or who are your audience, how are they going to get the most from each thing that they attend, and how vital that is to your success. And so one of the things, you lead from what I understand, so for anybody who's not familiar with South by Southwest, it starts with interactive, and then it goes into music and then film, or film and then music, correct? So it goes over.
Well, interactive and film are concurrent, then it segues into music, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so see, that's why we have to have it explained to us. So that's good. But you go over many days, and you have, really the core of it is creativity. So how does interactive, how do you find your audience differentiates from film and music?
That's a great question, and I think that's one of the things that's changed a lot in recent years. When I was first came on board South by Southwest way back in the dark ages, it was fairly easy to delegate, understand what we then called multimedia, what was film, what was music. There was three very different things, three very different audiences, very different kinds of people. And it was neat that we had this event that brought these people together because they were very different. What I think has changed significantly in that time period is that this kind of idea of convergence, that all these industries, or these three industries particularly, interactive, music, and film, are much more similar than they are different at this point. And thinking of some of the big tech companies that dominate our lives at this point, for instance, YouTube. It's a tech company, but there's so much original content on YouTube now. It's kind of a film company. Spotify, it's a tech company because it's rooted in technology. Well, wait, but it's a music company. And so many of these things that were for South by Southwest, and for all of us, at one time, fairly isolated bastions have all come together. And I think that's one of the, we were South by Southwest starting with these three events. We've been a good place, and been, well equipped to take advantage of this as this convergence happens. It certainly creates challenges, for lack of a better term, on when we're deciding, well, is that part of the tech event, or is that part of the film event, or is that part of the music event? But again, I mean, the bottom line of all this stuff, which hasn't changed in 25, 30 years, is, as you said, it's a celebration of creativity. It brings together very, very creative people. And South by Southwest, hopefully in our best days, provides a platform where these creative people can achieve their goals. To something that you said earlier about riffing off of, humans. Certainly humans are, at this point, very important in terms of figuring out what that programming is for an event, be it South by Southwest or other events. I think even at a more basic level, we are all at this point in the customer service business, and as event professionals, workers, event managers, however you want to phrase that, and that is all the more accentuated because of social media. Such that if we treat customers, our registrants, our attendees well, that gets out on social media quickly. Wow, I had a great time at blank blank. You should come. If we do something not so well, if we treat someone without respect, if we're rude to someone, that gets out there very quickly too. So, I think that customer service skill at this point is equally important as the skill of programming and understanding what's next on the horizon. And I think eventually, or eventually may not be that far away, the robots will be able to do that programming probably better than the humans can in a lot of ways, but the humans will still be able to do the customer service, the creativity aspect much, much better than robots. And that's something that we've got to remember as we move forward.
I'm glad that you brought up social media, because I do want to take a moment to is all the people watching live. So we've got people here in the Zoom chat. We've got people on Facebook Live, and we also have the live tweeting going on Twitter. So hi, everybody. If you do have any questions for Hugh, please let us know, and we'll try to get them answered. One thing that I think is very interesting, when you have something called interactive, there's an expectation of high engagement. So I'm curious, in terms of engagement, when you're working with your sponsors and your partners, how have their expectations evolved, and how are you working with them to make sure that the experience of the attendees is kind of in line with the brand?
Sure. Another great question there. So much of the event is panels, presentations, and on the one hand, I think the best speakers are always speakers with energy, with passion, that can engage the audience that way. But it's still kind of a closed ecosystem. You've got a speaker on stage, you've got an audience that's sitting down, and they may ask questions, but again, not as much interaction there as is optimal. I think one of the things that, going in a slightly different direction there, one of the things that we've certainly seen a ton of at South by Southwest over the last few years, and even more so in 2018, as these sponsors that are coming in and spending a pretty penny on creating activations and engagements that really create a lasting memory, a lasting experience for attendees. The thing that got the most headlines in 2018 was HBO coming in and doing their Westworld experience, which you probably have read about or may have read about, but if you hadn't, they created a whole Westworld village that was 20 miles outside of Austin. And they put tickets on sale, and tickets sold out in 30 seconds or were gobbled up in 30 seconds. They trained actors for 6 months to man this village, but they bussed attendees out to this space. Attendees got off the bus, and they were, completely immersed in a real life version of this TV show. Again, that is, that is the high end of interactivity here, and sets a high bar to follow. and was certainly not a cheap thing to do. But in terms of the amount of buzz that they got out of that thing, probably worth it, and probably had a high ROI on that. So
now, are you working with your sponsors or partners when they do these activations, or is this just something that they're doing in your presence?
They are doing the bulk of heavy lifting on that. We're certainly in the loop on what's happening there, and advising to some extent on safety issues as well as other issues that we know of. Again, the Westworld thing is the high end of what we've seen there. In previous years, it was a Mr. Robot Ferris wheel that was placed in downtown Austin. So, if you're a fan of the Mr. Robot show, wow, that's cool. It just looks exactly like a TV show. And again, working with companies on things like that. So again, creating as much interactivity, as much tangible touch points, feel points for attendees as possible. And I think enhancing their experience that way.
So one of our attendees said, Mary Baird Wilcox said, "Hooray, it's great to see Hugh from South by Southwest on here." So, and sweet. I was like, yes, we agree. So it's great. So now I have to say, I know it didn't wrap that long ago, and you look really good. So now, what was your highlight, or two or three highlights maybe from this year? Because it's probably hard to pick one. Obviously Westworld, big, sponsor activation. You probably didn't spend a lot of time there because you probably had some other things going on. So, do you have a couple of things that were just like, that was amazing, I'm so glad that worked out?
The Westworld thing, I did not get to attend, so I hear it was amazing, and until someone tells me otherwise, I'm going to go with that. Okay. But for me, probably the highlight, or certainly the highlight, was we were able to pull Elon Musk into the show as a speaker. He's certainly someone who much of our community is very, very enamored with. This was something that literally came together at the last minute. And my role here was fairly small, sending a few emails, and then lots of very talented people on the South by Southwest staff handled all the details. But again, for as long as I've worked at South by Southwest, 25 plus years, I've never seen something of this magnitude come together so quickly and be as successful as it was. And so that was really neat, and neat in a lot of different ways. So that'll be a memory that'll stick around for a long time. Otherwise, we had a very, very strong international presence at this year's event. The international presence is something that has been growing for the last several years. Even more so in 2018. That's neat. That is a function of the growing international representation of or international reputation of South by Southwest. It's also a function of simply that it's easier to get to Austin from points outside the U.S. than it ever was before. I was just in a meeting before this interview with someone talking about, how their experience at South by Southwest was hearing more non-English speaking people than English speaking people, and in a city like Austin, that is fairly rare. So again, that was really neat. Another thing that we kind of can laugh at, but as event organizers, we know that this is incredibly important. We had very, very nice weather in Austin for 10 days straight. Austin in March tends to be nice, but we usually have a day of cold. We usually have a day of rain. And this is the first year I can remember where we didn't have a day of that. The fact of having nice weather helps spread people out, helps mitigate what could be overcrowding issues. By comparison, if there is a day that's cold, it's rainy, it pushes everyone indoors, makes everyone a little more grumpy, just makes it hard to create a positive experience. So, that amongst most things that we have some degree of control over, we certainly have the least control over weather. And when it comes together like that, you just are, you feel so lucky and so kind of blessed, and wish you could replicate that for all the events you do, right?
Oh, yes, we sure do. So, although I also saw an interesting case study from South by Southwest, because you can tell that, okay, so first of all, I'm obviously a total event nerd, but, this is an event that I do follow because I think there's just always great lessons and case studies. And one of them was around when there was some bad weather, how you were able to use the two things. One was to use the app to get people to know where to go so that they could be not standing in the pouring rain, but also to, from a VIP experience, which I think is another thing that you've done really well, is to make sure that people in general felt safe and taken care of, but from a VIP perspective, that they really got that extra level of, and here's your shade and shelter perspective. So I think, you've responded really well to the weather. So we have a couple of audience questions as well. So one is related to what you just said about the international audience, and a question if there's any interesting accommodations that need to be made as that international audience is growing.
I think that that's an area we will have to improve in a lot as that international audience continues to grow. I think the experience of the international attendees, whether it's South by Southwest or whether it's any other event, is so dependent on having someone who speaks their language, who can be that Sherpa, so to speak, the guide, the go-between to kind of show them around. I think that's important for any registrant from any country, whether they speak the language or not, but even more so when you're coming from a foreign country, you're not completely familiar with the language, the country, the city. So we'll need to step up on that part of our game as we move forward there. And hope we can continue to move forward. Again, I think that international audience is one of the most exciting things of our growth. I think we have different cultures we have in our different countries. It's interesting to see, how we use technology in different ways, how we think of creativity in different ways, but neat when you can have a platform that brings these people together and find common things that common experiences, common ideas that help to unify us, and that's neat.
I think something that Tahira mentioned about kind of using the app for communicating, and then also with this international audience, crisis communications is something that's very topical right now. There's a lot of things that have been going on, especially after Las Vegas. One thing with a growing international audience is how do you work that into your crisis communications plan and making sure that everyone who attends your event gets important information when they need to get it.
Yeah, well, we have significant functionality at this point through our apps on push notifications. We're trying not to use those unless that is something of a, really a crisis, because certainly the understanding, the more you use the push notifications for things that aren't crises, the more likely someone's going to turn that off and not be around. The event that we had this year while South by Southwest was a big success, I think, in 2018 on a lot of different fronts, and showcased Austin in a very, very positive manner. At the same time South by Southwest was going on, we had this crazy bomber in Austin, and that did not show the city in its best light. So that was, interesting, for lack of a better term, exercise in how you manage messages, how you redouble, triple, quadruple down on security, what new measures you need to take, what are you informing your attendees of. I think we generally acquitted ourselves well there. We've done a lot of training for scenarios like this. I think that like it or not. A lot of event planning at this point, 2018 and moving forward, is dealing with security-related situations like this, or planning for security-related situations like this. It would be wonderful to say that this is just a blip in time, and that we're going to go back to a more stable future where we're not going to have to worry about these things. But I don't think that's the case. I think that event planners such as ourselves are going to become more and more security conscious on all fronts. Whether that means, are you wanting people going into panel rooms? Where do you need to have metal detectors, that type thing? How much police presence do you have? So and so. Again, how do you plan for this stuff in advance with the hope that you never have to use that planning, but nonetheless have it somewhere if the situation arises? So yes, that is one of the many challenges we all face as event planners at this point.
I think that answers our audience question, which is, they're wanting just to ask, are you involved in security planning? And I think you're absolutely right. This is not something that's, as you watched your event grow to, plus 100,000 people, you are not doing this alone. You're doing it with local law enforcement and emergency planning, and it's, I'm sure, a concerted effort, and it will continue to have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. We work very, very closely at this point with the Austin Police Department, with the Austin Fire Department, with numerous other state and federal agencies. And again, it's a wrinkle or a curveball that you didn't have to necessarily deal with quite as much 10 years ago. But these are the times we live in, and it would be foolish if we all weren't planning for these things. And that certainly is the case with big events like South by Southwest, but it's certainly something we all have to think of even when we're doing smaller and more intimate events.
Absolutely. So, on that kind of idea of being agile and flexible, that's a term that I think event professionals, especially in 2018, they have to be. How does your team stay agile? Like, how are you flexible in case something happens, or how do you make changes on the fly? Well,
I think that the most we can do to be agile is to, as effectively use as possible the 10 months leading up to the event to plan. And so that we're minimizing the number of last minute details we have to plan for on site, and we have maximum time for positive things like Elon Musk wants to speak at the event. That's great. We just need to find a venue. And not so positive things like, oh no, there's this crazy person who's doing domestic terrorism on the other side of town. How do we deal with that? So again, in terms of agility, I think the best thing we can do there is try to be as disciplined as possible and bring the same kind of urgency to work 5 or 6 months ahead of time that we do, 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. That's hard to do as humans because, there's the magic of being under a deadline and how that forces you to work harder. But I think one of the skills that we've gained a little more of at South by Southwest in recent years is learning how to push a lot of the work for the event 5 and 6 and 7 months out in the event.
I think, yeah, that's critical, isn't it? So, I mean, you have film, you have music, you have interactive, you have all of these, creatives clamoring for attention. So how much, and you also have all these great activations. So we've had a number of audience questions coming in, what new activations or technology can you, just not wait to incorporate, and, something that you saw that was new, that was a really big success. But how do you, and, working with sponsors and partners, how do you set boundaries around what people can do? Do you set boundaries? Do you just say, have a free for all? And, what's the approach?
Well, I think that we have learned, in some cases the hard way, as we've gotten bigger, that you have to set be much more structured in the boundaries you set. Again, the size and scale that we're fortunate enough to be at now, you have to be very, very specific in terms of what sponsors can and cannot do. And that may not have been the case 10 years ago or 15 years ago when we were smaller, but it certainly is now. We want to be able to have create an event that creates as many positive experiences and creates as many opportunities for learning and growth and creativity. But again, safety has got to be the number one concern, and so much of that boundary setting relies on that bottom line of safety. So again, it's something that we've gotten much better at. We can and will continue to get better at of skirting that line, that very fine line between boundaries and safety, and creating an amazing experience that creates lifelong lasting memories.
So is there one thing, because this is a great audience question, so is there any one thing you did new this year that was really a major success outside of Elon and Westworld, which we know were obviously awesome?
The one thing we did, this year that helped a whole lot is one of our biggest off-season initiatives was creating tools that would give attendees better perspectives on crowding problems. So what we did this year is for panels and presentations, we created a system with the mobile app as well as with the online schedule, where you would be able to see in advance how many people had starred, liked, favorited that session. And so you would have, the idea is that attendees would have better expectations. Wow, that's going to be really crowded. Maybe I don't want to go to that, or it doesn't look too crowded. I should go to that. No one likes not being able to get into the thing they wanted to get into, whether that's a movie, whether that's a band, whether that's a panel, it's a presentation. But I think your dislike, your disappointment, your level of anger or frustration is significantly less if you understand that in advance. Okay, it doesn't look like I'm going to get in, but I'm going to take my chances and go there, versus, oh, I just ran 3 blocks to get to this venue. It's completely crowded. Why did I run those 3 blocks? I'm really frustrated now.
And
that was
sweaty.
Something that, and sweaty. So we worked on that plan all year. There's still a lot of things that can be improved with that, but it helped a whole lot. Something we did last year, 2017, that we did even more aggressively in 2018 that also helped on this was for the sessions that we saw were going to be extremely popular and extremely well attended. We created encore sessions, quote unquote, which sounds fancy and sexy. Basically, it's another version, another sitting of the session, such that people could get in. So if I missed it the first time because it was packed and there weren't any seats available, I can come back the second time. I think that, again, this is something that's taken us a long time to get better at, but certainly attendees, stating the obvious, attendees are frustrated when they pay a lot of money for some kind of credential and they can't get into everything that they want to get into. So creating these systems that gave people more expectations and gave people more chances to attend the content they wanted to, I think was one of the things that created a significantly better experience for a lot of the people coming to South by Southwest.
It's funny when sorry, Alex, but there's just this question that says, what new activations or technology do you look forward to incorporating at South by Southwest in the future? And I think that all of us, when we would ask this kind of a question, would hope for kind of a sexy answer, but any real event professional would probably answer exactly like you just did, which is to say, wow, there's this technology that made my participant experience better, and that's worth working on. So I think that that's really great.
Well, thanks for the nice words there. And again, spoken like an event geek or whatnot. Our jobs, our mandate here is to create scenarios where where attendees can have as many positive outcomes as possible. And while the Westworld thing was neat, while various other activations were really, really neat, again, simply creating a scenario where more people can understand what they can get into and what they can't get into and what their options are improved a lot of things for us.
So I think a lot of what that comes down to is the great content, right? Like if you didn't have great content, the demand wouldn't be high and people wouldn't be sad about missing it. But what can you tell us a bit about, the process for building that content out? I know that you guys use the panel picker, which is something that's very unique, that some people may not know about. So if you could just give us a little insight into what that process is like, that'd be great.
Sure. We have an interface that we've used for about 10 years called the South by Southwest Panel Picker, as you mentioned. It is basically a modified crowdsourcing approach to content. We end up, we will take speaking proposals from late June to mid-July. We'll get somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 to 6,000 total speaking proposals, of which maybe 1,000 are selected for the event. So it's a very, very competitive process. That the panel picker accomplishes a lot of things, but it fundamentally reflects this belief that the community has lots of really great ideas, and that getting Alex, who's a expert on chatbots, to organize a session on chatbots is more effective than me organizing a session on chatbots when I don't know anything about them. The panel picker also, I think, helps get a lot of new speakers into the event year after year. So while there are a lot of repeat speakers, we tend to have a lot of new energy, new blood in there every year, and that's good in terms of keeping the experience fresh. I also think that the panel picker, one of the great side benefits of it is it kind of serves as a barometer on what the tech community is interested in. So again, if we see that there are 100 sessions, 100 proposals on robots this year, and last year we only had 10 proposals on robots, well, wow, this community all of a sudden became very, very interested in robots. We need to do more robot programming. So this panel picker system, I think, has helped us a lot. It's not perfect, but again, it's reflects this strong community belief. We still are curating, quote unquote, doing outreach for probably 20 to 25% of our programming, and that's the stuff that we're doing more of in, say, November, December, January, February.
And if someone wanted to be a part of that, how would they go about doing that?
We most definitely want as many of your listeners and your viewers to enter speaking ideas. The URL for the panel picker is panelpicker.sxsw.com. That's panelpicker.sxsw.com. That interface will open for the 2019 season on Monday, June 25th, and then closes on Friday, July 20th. So there's about a 3-week period where people can enter ideas. And again, what we're looking for there is very, very creative ideas across any of the topics that we cover. So we'll ask for a title, a description, a video. All the ideas that are entered into this interface are then posted online, and people can, the community can then vote on them. So it's a simple, Reddit user interface of thumbs up or thumbs down, comment on them. We also have an advisory board that reviews all these ideas, and staff reviews these ideas. So hopefully we are picking the best of the best of the best ideas for the following year. Again, this system, I think, has helped us grow. So it's a really neat thing to be involved with. It's a really neat to see all the different kinds of ideas coming in from, at this point, creatives from all over the U.S. and all over the world, and to see what people are thinking about for the next year.
So fun. I love it. So do you remember at the beginning you said, do we usually go for an hour? And we said, we're almost at the end. So we're going to do some rapid fire questions. So these are going to be short answers because we want to make sure we get
the spin class is almost over, is what you're saying?
We're so close. So you're like at mile 10.5. So how far in advance for your activations, how far in advance does the planning start? Right at the beginning or kind of continuous?
We spend most of April, i.e. this coming month or the month we're in now, reviewing what went right and what went wrong at last year's event. And we believe that's a very, very important part of the process to be as aggressive as possible with that feedback. But then by May, we are, we're very directed to the next year, and certainly by June and July, when the panel picker is in full swing, we are, we're in, the season has begun, so to speak.
Now, going way back to the way back, Mike Butkus would like to know, when you were starting, did you have capital to book speakers in the venues, or did you find sponsors first to help?
No, I mean, we don't pay for speakers. We don't pay honorariums. We don't pay travel. So it's certainly a little bit harder when you're a smaller event, or when we were a smaller event, to get speakers in. But, like anything else in life, the more the more people you call on the phone, the more people you email, the more doors you knock on, the more chances you'll get the compelling speakers involved. And certainly, in 2018, what we can offer speakers, again, we're not giving them a payment, but we can give them lots of exposure, and in many ways that is of equal or higher value than anything we could give them from a monetary standpoint.
And the opportunity also just to, be at the coolest event in town, right? So
you say it well. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there other events? So I said at the beginning, I have my little list of, South by Southwest and 4 others. Are there other events around the world that inspire you, or that you and your team look to for inspiration, or that you're dying to go to yourself?
Certainly get a lot of inspiration from TED. And I think we have a lot of carryover in terms of speakers. Their event is certainly very different than ours, and it's much smaller, much more curated, versus ours is maybe not quite as curated, much larger. But again, lots of inspiration from there. Certainly a lot of our staff attend CES, maybe more from a sales side than a programming side. We're also we have a lot of people go to Web Summit in the fall, go to Pop Tech. We're pretty aggressive in terms of traveling, with the idea being that the more people you meet and connect with, the more of these you can hopefully get excited about coming to Austin in March. Personally, I am very skittish about going to other events, because I always think that they're doing things much, much better than we are, and I always go back into my hotel room and cry or something. But I'm trying to get over that fear.
I think that we have to I think we have to go out there and see what else is going on out in the world. And there's lots of things that I see that I think, I could never do that, either because I know it wouldn't work for my audience, or because I know my stakeholders would never approve it, or for whatever reason, but you can still enjoy it in the moment.
Absolutely.
And we if we look at events as sort of the highlight reel of life, then we should, I think, be going out and experiencing them, right? So
nice. That's a good quote. That's a good pull quote. Events are the highlight reel of life.
They totally are. That's what Instagram is for. So, okay, I'm going to ask one more question before I turn this over to Alex, because this is the question I know everybody wants to know, okay? South by Southwest, famous for the parties, networking events. So when you have such fierce competition for those events, what do you think are the, just in your experience of having been that organizer, what makes that party the hot ticket?
What makes the party the hot ticket is if you can have the innovators, the creators who are doing the most interesting things at that party. If you go online and do a little searching, you can see that Ashton Kutcher sponsored a party at South by Southwest 2018, and it looked like it had some great food and great liquor and great party favors, that type thing. But I would wager that all of us would have loved to go and talk to Ashton Kutcher and the other guests there, simply to understand what they're thinking about, understand their creativity, and so to that end, less about the food, the beer, the spirits, and more about the people there. And certainly, ultimately, I think that as event professionals, we are creating this structure, creating this platform, creating this scaffolding that holds a lot of this stuff. But that networking, those parties, those cocktail receptions, the breakfast, the lunch, the dinner, that's where people get the most value.
The lineup.
Out of what we provide. I mean, people like to learn things at events, but come on, at this point, you can get so much of that by just going on YouTube. But what you can't get by YouTube is that face-to-face connection with somebody that turns out to be a business opportunity, that turns out to be a friendship that lasts for a long, long time. That's a person that you can stay with when you go to another city, that you can connect with. That's some of the biggest value I think we provide as events.
Awesome. Well, I think this has been invaluable. But we do like to close every show with 2 questions that we ask every single guest. So the first one is, if you could pick only one, what is your one tip you have for event planners?
My one tip for event planners is patience. Events take a long, long time to build. And kudos to anyone who can build them quickly. They are much smarter than I am, and they probably have much more financial resources. But for most of us, I think that idea of patience, that it's going to be a long haul, is absolutely one of the most important things to remember.
Excellent. And last but not least, do you have any new cool resources you want to share? Websites you go to, blogs, books, gadgets?
I hate to end on a downer there, but no, at this point, I mean, I'm just finally re-emerging into the world after being head down for so long. So any book that I open and read and have a chance to think about something else aside from South by Southwest is an absolute gift. So give me another month and I'll be reading something that's maybe more professionally valuable. But at this point, just being able to think about something else is a real blessing and a gift and neat.
So we will get you guys those resources in a month.
Good.
When we did our end of the show last year, or at the end of the year, they said, what were your best resources? And I was like, my family, basically. My daughter's doing all my meal planning, and my husband's doing everything else. And my son learned how to drive, so I don't have to drive anywhere. And it's like, yeah, so I get it.
Good.
Well,
but I will say that and tying this back into some of the concepts we've talked a lot about this afternoon, what we do in our best days at South by Southwest, and all of us as event planners, is create experiences, create platforms where creativity can thrive. And so anything we can do that helps us be more creative is a value, whether that's reading a book, whether that's listening to a symphony, whether that's listening to a new band, pop band or whatever, or reading poetry, any of that stuff that can get us out of our head a little and think about new ways to explore creativity, I think is a huge value to the value that we can in turn offer our attendees.
Awesome. Well, on that note, thank you again for joining us, Hugh. We really appreciate it. I know our viewers, it's not every day you get an opportunity to hear some behind the scenes from one of the best events in the industry. So that said, for everyone watching, Event Icons is recorded live each Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Do not forget to join us. You can join us on Facebook Live. You can see behind the scenes. You can join the Twitter chat on Twitter. These are recorded, so these are also released every following Tuesday on iTunes, Pocket Cast, Stitcher, wherever your favorite podcast app is. We probably are there. And you can always view us at event-icons.com. along with show notes and links to resources, which we'll get in a month from Q. But the best way to join us is live. Sign up at event-icons.com. Join the chat live here in Zoom. And we want to know what you think. So join us on Twitter using the hashtag EventIcons, or join the Event Icons Facebook page. And let us know what icons you want to be on the show. So thank you again for joining us, everyone. And we will see you next week on hashtag EventIcons.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of hashtag EventIcons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the social conversation. Sponsored by Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with hashtag EventIcons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on hashtag EventIcons.